Hi guys, welcome to another book review. So I've actually read and done a review on this author in the past for one of his other books that he wrote called Evicted. It is his new book that I'll be sharing with you guys today, called Poverty by America, written by Matthew Desmond. So I remembered reading Evicted and how much I enjoyed his writing style and the information he presented in the book. So obviously I felt like it's a no-brainer. I'm buying this one. And I have to say there is some overlap between Evicted and this book as well, because in Evicted he was talking about the working poor, and obviously in this one he's talking about them as well. But he's very good about talking about the socioeconomic class differences that are incorporated into poverty, and how basically our society does everything we can to keep the poor poor. But also how difficult we make it for them to get any kind of government assistance. He even talks about in one of the chapters where what this nonprofit did to help people access resources they would qualify for, I believe it was for food stamps, was basically they just sent out a flyer with the phone number to get people to call, and it took you to an agent that would help you fill out the application. And so because of that, there was an increase in people who received the benefit, which he points to a lot of the time folks who are poor may qualify for some benefits, but they just don't know about them, or the government, and be it local branch or federal branch, make it too difficult for folks to get. And they make the application very confusing. So it forces them to be like, I don't have time to do this. I can't. So it's very interesting, some of the points he makes, and they're pretty valid, actually. He talks about how unions have since lost popularity and lost their strength, and therefore that's impacted workers. So he talks about how wages have been impacted due to that shift as well. He talks about how big corporations do what they can to not allow their workers to unionize, and all of that information is presented in really solid data, which is one of the reasons why I like his work, is because it's not just a bunch of personal stories. It's like he looks at statistics, he looks at databases, he tries to get information to kind of back up what some of these people he's following are going through. He talks about how just, again, we allow people to live in pretty poor conditions, where maybe they don't have adequate heat, they don't have adequate housing at all. But the opposite side of the argument is, if not for this house that's not really livable, they would be homeless and possibly outside. So he brings that, and again, that's why I'm saying there is some overlap with Evicted, because Evicted was pretty much about poor people being evicted from slum housing, or like slumlords, right? So it was pretty, there are some tie-ins to that as well. And he does make very interesting points about when neighborhoods or cities seek to build low-income housing, how a lot of folks in the middle class or upper middle class will do everything they can to keep that kind of housing development out of their neighborhood. So obviously the not in my backyard folk, the NIMBYs. But he did point out there are, of course, like racial divisions here, that the majority of people who come out against that are white. But he does also say that if it turns out that they are white families renting in that neighborhood, they are more likely to support low-income housing being built there. So that seems to be the breaker of that demographic, right? If you yourself are a renter. So, which I think is obvious, but I guess maybe I'm weird, because I've never really thought that having low-income housing in my area would necessarily be a bad thing. But that's because I am a product of low-income housing. Now, granted, I didn't grow up in the traditional like project that we think of, where it's a big building with a lot of apartments within. That's not where I grew up. It was a condo in California, but it was still low-income housing. My mom was a single mother, and so I have benefited from low-income housing. And so to a certain extent, I really identified with this. But that's why I'm saying like maybe I'm strange, because if someone was like, oh yeah, we want to build low-income housing in your neighborhood, I would be more for that than saying no. But then if I go to sell my house, there's like, homeless people right outside of my community. So for me, I understand that the worry is, it'll decrease the value of my home. But if by not letting them build, that meant that when I go to sell my house, people have to step over homeless people to come look at my house, how would that not impact the value? It would, right? Or at least like inspire enough fear that people won't want to buy your house, let alone go to your open house. But again, maybe I'm weird. But that's my train of thought on this issue. He points at some really, he points out some good ideas and ways to invest in ending poverty. But of course, we're America, we fear socialism and those kinds of programs, so we don't do it. But again, that's the other issue he talks about, where America, sometimes we tend to think certain issues are like, oh, this is just a one-time investment. We'll invest in it once and we never have to do it again. That's what we did for the most part with housing assistance, right? When you built projects and low-income housing, buildings and stuff like that, we just invested in them a few times, and then after that we stopped. And then the government was like, oh, why are they falling apart? Why are they shitty? Why is there so much crime in it? Well, if you live in a shitty place where, no one's taking care of it, and it's supposed to be taken care of by the state and the government, like, the people who live there can't afford to take care of it. If they could afford to take care of it, they wouldn't need public housing. So I'm just saying. But yeah, he talks about a lot of no-brainer ideas to help solve the poverty crisis in America. By, recommending maybe certain tax breaks, which a lot of people, anytime you mention taxes, it gets pretty polarized, or just encouraging the uber rich to pay their fair share. Again, for whatever reason, that tends to be a no as well. But either way, he presents this body of data and facts where basically if we listened and we implemented some of these ideas, it would lift, the majority, or at least 3/4 of kids who are poor in America, out of poverty. But again, it's going to offer you food for thought. It's going to piss you off at the same time. He's a really good writer. He presents a lot of really great information. I highly recommend reading this because it helps you see what's going on with the poor and the working poor. It helps you understand to a greater degree how we in the middle class and upper class have contributed to making basically like a caste system and a class system just based on our current services and body of government and all of that, and how it's all intertwined together. And it may give you the opportunity to just kind of think about how you organize your life, what choices you make, what companies you decide to support, when it comes to, how they treat their workers, that kind of stuff. So really, I highly recommend this one. This guy's a great writer. I hope he keeps writing more stuff because I love his work. Anyway, till next time.